Hello again, everyone, and welcome back. My name is Tom Nelson, and this is a continuation of the Diabetes Control video course. This is video lesson number 11, step number 5 of the 6 steps to gaining complete control over your diabetes. This lesson 11 is about diabetic weight loss. This is part 8. We're going to be talking all about fat cells. Where fat is stored differs in men versus women. Adult men usually carry their body fat in their chest, their abdomen, and their buttocks, and that promotes what's called the apple-shaped body. Women carry their fat in their breasts, their hips, their waist, and their buttocks, and that is classified as the pear shape. It is the hormones that dictate where fat is going to be stored, estrogen in women and testosterone in men, or in both. So when the hormones activate during puberty, the body begins to differentiate where that fat is going to be stored. However, most of the fat cells have already been developed prior to puberty and not after. The number of fat cells in your body stays the same throughout your entire life, unless you become obese. And there, when you become obese and you fill your fat cells, your body will produce more brand new additional fat cells, and once they are established, that number will never decrease. They just get smaller as you burn the fat that was stored in them. So as you increase fat storage, the cells get larger and larger. They balloon out. So when you lose weight, the fat cells only become smaller. They never go away. Very few triglycerides are assembled in those fat cells. Most of it is produced inside your liver. Triglycerides are made up of 3, which is where the tri comes from. Those 3 individual molecules or strands of fat, and those 3 individual strands are locked together by enzymes to a glycerol molecule, which forms the triglyceride. That's where the name comes from. So the removal of fatty acids is from storage. It's accomplished through a process called lipolysis. So enzymes and hormones manufactured inside the fat cells are going to break down those triglycerides into those individual fatty acids, those individual strands, and the glycerol. And both are going to be released into the bloodstream. The fatty acids are released as they're needed for fuel to replace glucose if it's not available. So the enzyme triglyceride lipase is responsible for regulating the rate of lipolysis and the release of those fatty acids into your bloodstream. Insulin interferes with the release of fatty acids from the fat cells. That means that if you're eating too much food, you have too much glucose in your bloodstream, that there's going to be more insulin in the bloodstream, and that's going to shut down your fat cells in terms of releasing any fat. So there are 2 different types of fat which serve very different purposes. Again, the white fat cells, the visceral and the adipose, which are found primarily in adults, are important sources for that energy metabolism whenever glucose isn't present, and it acts as a cushion to protect your vital organs against shock if you bump into something. It acts as an insulator also, again, to preserve your body heat. The brown fat is found mostly in newborn babies, primarily between their shoulders. And again, it produces only heat to protect that infant against body heat loss. The brown fat does not produce any energy. It, in fact, instead consumes energy. So a newborn does not have much white fat at all when they're born. So there are white fat cells, but they are mostly empty. They haven't been filled yet. But as the newborn nurses and uses the brown fat to generate heat, they're going to fill those white fat cells from the fat in your mother's milk. So as the brown fat is used up, the white cells are filling up, and they're taking over as an insulator to preserve the body heat. So fat tissue, like all other tissues, is comprised of cells which happen to be fat cells, called adipose cells or adipocyte cells. Those fat cells are unique in that they contain up to 85% fat as the fluid inside. You may recall in earlier videos on cellular basics that the other cells in your body and your other tissues have up to 80 to 85% water inside those cells. So these are unique in that mostly fat is stored inside. So the white fat cells contain a nuclei, a city hall, which contains their DNA, just like any other cell, but it's usually not in the center of the cell. It usually gets pushed up and flattened against the inside of the membrane. So the brown adipose fat cells contain varying size fat droplets. They have a round, centrally located nuclei, City Hall, and a larger amount of cytoplasm, which is the fluid inside the cell, and numerous mitochondria. They have a massive number of power plants to burn that brown fat in order to generate the heat to keep the baby warm and safe. So adipose fat cells are filled chiefly with triglycerides and one or more fatty acids like stearic, oleic, and palmitic acids. The adipose fat cells are loaded with enzymes that are manufactured inside the factories of those fat cells. So again, just like all of the other cells of your bodies, your fat cells have factories, warehouses, city hall, trucking companies, and all of the other organelles that are found in every other cell in your body. So these enzymes specialized in the breaking down of triglycerides to form fatty acids and glycerol for other processes. Most of these triglycerides come from eating excess carbohydrates, where insulin is forced to convert the excess glucose that your other cells could not take up. They had stuffed their warehouses full. So the excess was converted into triglycerides, and they are stored in your fat cells. So when adequate amounts of glucose are present, the adipose tissue cells will secrete fatty acids, which are then used by the muscle cells and other tissues for fuel on a regular basis, but a limited amount. So the brown cells do not secrete fatty acids like the white blood fat cells, but instead they use the fat as a fuel just to generate heat, as I said earlier. So when fat or glucose are burned for fuel, 60% of that combustion becomes heat when it's glucose, and 40% becomes energy. The energy is used to power the cell. The adipose cells also synthesize and they secrete very complex forms of fatty acids. Those behave like hormones, and they inhibit the breakdown of fat and leptin, which is a metabolism regulator hormone. So the membranes of the adipose fat cells can express specialized receptors. That means they can put receptors on the membrane of the cell that will bind steroid hormones that will signal the cell to increase the storage of fat or to release fatty acids into the bloodstream. So they're controlled by steroid hormones. So the membranes of the adipose fat cells can express specialized receptors that bind those steroid hormones that signal the cell to increase the fat and to release those fatty acids once again. So other forms of fat are deposited in the muscles surrounding the intestines, around the liver, and around your heart. So it's these deposits of fat that act as a soft, elastic cushion between those vital organs. The brown and white cells are distinct in that they are not found together. The amount of fat that is stored in the adipose cells, the tissue, has a significant impact on your health. So too little fat can impact reproduction, and too much fat can lead to obesity, to the formation of cancers, diabetes, and cardiovascular diseases. So now go to video lesson number 11, part 9 of step 5. You're going to learn how your body produces fat. Thank you for watching, and please pay it forward.